I'm Rabbi Sherre Hirsch, your guest host today on American Jewish University's Open Learning. If this is your first time, welcome. We're so glad you're here and you're in for an incredible morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. If it's your 50th time, thank you so much. Keep coming back. We have so much learning for you here. Take a seat, get comfortable. Give yourself the gift of 45 minutes of nourishing your mind and soul. And I promise you, we don't run on Jewish time. We will be on time. Also, gather your questions and make sure to put them in the chat, as I will be soliciting questions towards the end. And I promise you, we are giving you best in class front row seats to Jewish wisdom. And today, no doubt, will not disappoint. Maybe once in a lifetime, each one of us will ask this question. Who knows if it was not for this moment that I arrived at this station in life? On October 7th, Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove, sitting next to me in the box, not only asked that question, but answered it immediately and has been doing so ever since. Just like he references our ancestor Esther, who put herself on the line, threw her lot in with people and rallied them into action, so too Rabbi Cosgrove, as you know, the head of Park Avenue Synagogue since 2008, and a leading voice in American Jewry, and a dear friend for almost 30 years. I know that's crazy. Followed Esther's lead, raising over 18 million plus. He won't even release the number in 1 week after October 7th. And since then, he has not stopped. Now with the publication of his first book, there was a previous edited collection. I will clarify that in a second, but this is his first book for such a time as this. Rabbi Cosgrove has given Jews and non-Jews, and I want you to hear non-Jews too, a guide to understand how we got to here, where we are now, and where do we go. I am honored, privileged for a moment like this to welcome my dear colleague and friend, and now soon to be best-selling author, Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rabbi Hirsch, or Sherry, as I've known you for decades. I am deeply honored. I was educated at AJU. I consider AJU my home away from home, and to be here in dialogue with the global AJU community, with you as a moderator. If that was all it is, Dayenu, that would be enough. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to share with your community what the book is about for such a time as this, and really just to have a expansive conversation on the issues of the day.
Absolutely. So I want to start with a personal note, because you dedicated this book to your parents, Gay and Malcolm, who I know personally, and you share a lot of personal anecdotes, including how hard it is to be a rabbi and to, quote, stay in your lane at a time like this. Why was it important to you to not only give a narrative about what's happening, but put yourself deeply into the story?
Thank you for asking that. I think on a certain level, who we are as rabbis, what we believe in, what our priorities are, rabbi or not rabbi, there's always a biographical element to it. And I know that my vision for Jewish life, my hopes for Israel and the Jewish people are expressions of the values that my parents implanted in me throughout my life and continue to do so. And so for me, I wasn't speaking abstractly about the balancing act of American Jewry. In the book, I begin the opening chapter talking about living a hyphenated existence, about balancing our secular commitments, our Jewish commitments, where we spend our time, the relationships we commit to, the philanthropies we give to. We're always in a balancing act. This was a balancing act that I grew up with in my household. My father's a private practice physician. He's retired now, and he was someone who would inevitably go to the hospital to see patients before coming to synagogue on a Saturday morning, and then going back to see whoever he performed surgery on the day prior after, right? So I understood that to be an American Jew was a hyphenated existence, and it wasn't so much whether or not we fall on this side of the hyphen or that side of the hyphen, right? Is it our Jewish selves or our secular selves that assert themselves? But it's that we're constantly struggling with that question, which is the most generative place for identity itself, not a destination, but a journey. So I could give a million examples, and I give many of those examples about our commitment to Israel, about vengeance and empathy. All of these topics are somehow not just for the sociologists and theologians to discover, but these are lived experiences by way of my parents. So that's why I dedicated it to them.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I was also going to say that what comes out in the book is how this is so deeply personal to you. This isn't something you're preaching prescriptively to your congregants about how they should live. This is a narrative, a story of how did we get here? And you divide the book into 3 sections: how we got here, where we are now, and where we're going. So let's start with how we got here. October 7th, we know, was disorienting, as you said, a wake-up call, and opened our eyes. Why were we so surprised?
Look, first of all, I want to name something that you just referenced. It's personal, right? I use a figurative image of a wake-up call, but it was literally a wake-up call because I have family in Israel, not in the abstract sense, but committed relationships who called that morning. We all remember that October 7th morning, wherever we were. And we were woken up by the phone that Israel was under attack. Those going into battle, those going into shelters, who was safe, who wasn't safe. So this isn't a global Jewish family. This is family that many of us experienced that day. And I think there are two.
These are our children.
These are
right?
our
Those
children
that were kidnapped were our children.
This is my nephew who to this day is fighting in Gaza. I was on the phone the last week. No, it was 2 weeks ago when Israel was under fire from ballistic missiles from Iran, and my family with whom I was speaking to had to enter into the shelter because the phone call was cut off, right? People need to understand this. You know this better than anyone, Sherry, that to be a rabbi is to help pastor an individual or a community through an experience, but we are going through that experience too. And so we're holding our own pain, our own anxiety, our own family drama and trauma at the very moment that we're trying to help our communities navigate through this moment. I think to the question of surprise, I think there are sort of 2 subplots to this story. I think for a lot of people, there was a sense, and this took place in my office, that people said, where did this come from? How did we not see this? How were we shocked? Not just that Israel was caught off guard, but the anti-Semitism in the United States, the idea that we are, and you were so gracious in framing it by way of the title, the Book of Esther, right? We thought we were comfortable, but then the Hamans, the hatred came, and maybe we're not so comfortable. And I think that was really a wake-up call that caught many people by surprise. I think there were also those who said, no, it's been here all along. I told you so. And
Were
there's a
you
wag of the
surprised?
finger. Yes, I would put myself in the category. I wasn't surprised that the lid could blow up in Israel. I think, and we can get into the geopolitics of it, but I think the inability of the players in this narrative to create a viable long-term plan whereby both Israelis and Palestinians can have self-determination and a place to call home. I think that was an inevitable outcome of kicking the bucket down the road. I
Right. And you
think
talk
so.
about that is the inevitable outcome. And we could
Yeah.
talk about if that's the inevitable outcome now, or is that right now, do we have a job to do? It was a bit of a leading question.
Yeah. Well, so do you want to go there? We can go
Yeah,
there.
let's go there.
Okay. So
Do we ever
prospectively,
not go there, Elliot?
no, I think we always talk about whatever's on our mind. Okay, so frame the question, and I'm yours. So prospectively, or how we got here, or where we're
Well,
going.
let's go back a little bit. I want to say that you were surprised. I was a little less surprised because I'm living with my husband. But what's happened is there's this real loneliness that American Jews are feeling. And yet you also describe that there's a tribal awakening. What is it happening? Do we have to be hated to embrace our Jewishness? Is this the motivator? And if so, how is that comment on our Jewish lives today?
So I do think, in retrospect, that we took our comforts in America as Jews for granted. And whether it's we got lazy, we got comfortable, we were sleepwalking. Now, in retrospect, I will admit to have been surprised you were more alert to it. But those questions of whether the American Jewish experience is an exception to, say, global Jewry or Jewish history. I was under the impression that that hyphenated dream of you could be Jewish and you could be American, and that was what America is about. That was the promise of America, and that has turned out to be untrue. And we can get into the nature of the anti-Semitism. I think that one of the rubrics I use in my chapter on identity in this book is a difference between Genesis Jews and Exodus Jews. Now,
I was going to ask you about that.
I didn't come up with that. I got it from my teacher and friend, Rabbi Donnie L. Hartman, but I take it in a different direction than he did, which is to say that the promise of a Genesis identity, a Jewish identity, is the promise of Genesis chapter 12. God calls on Abraham, to be a great people, and you shall be a blessing. V'heyeh bracha. That is a positive assertion of what it means to be a Jew as a blessing to our people and as a blessing to the nations of the earth. An Exodus identity, as found in Exodus chapter 1, is Pharaoh, a new king arises, who sees the Jewish people as other. And because they are other, they must be feared. And because they are feared, they must be oppressed. And that the Exodus identity is an identity that is defined by being othered by whoever the general population is. Now, American Jews prior to October 7th may have had a Genesis identity or not. Right? Some of us lived actively as Jews, some of us didn't. But on October 8th, every American Jew woke up as an Exodus Jew. We were defined as other by dint of our connection to Israel and the atrocities that were perpetrated upon our people that day. We woke up to a new reality. And so we were all transformed to Exodus Jews, and the challenge of this moment is how do we retain the Genesis positive identity of what it means to be a Jew, eyes wide open to the threat of what is going on to Israel, as well as what is going on to American Jewry.
So, how do we change how we're perceived by others and also how we perceive ourselves? You say in the book, which I loved, Jews are misunderstood. We're both an underdog and an overdog. I love that, overdog. I've never heard that before. Persecuted and privileged. So, how do we change the perception we have of ourselves in order to change the perception others have of us?
Look, I think we have to reject the false binaries that are presented to us. I think we straddle identities, right? We objectively as Jews are living in a ring of fire moment. I think that Israel is surrounded by the north, by the south, by all directions, by an existential threat. I think objectively that is true. Israel is facing enemies, and the American Jewish community, in both very harsh as well as more genteel expressions of anti-Semitism, is threatened in a way, certainly in my lifetime, I've never felt this way. People asking really profound and profoundly painful questions about who they are as Jews, and their level of acceptance in American society. Period. Full stop. And I think by any measure, the American Jewish community is one of the most privileged, powerful, and developed Jewish communities that has ever existed on the face of this planet. And I think whether that is measured in our secular achievements by the Jewish institutions we've built, and I think Israel, right? October 7th is not the Shoah. The Shoah, there was no state of Israel. You know what's happening right now? Israel's punching back. And you know why? Because there's a sovereign state of Israel that's capable of defending itself. That is a data point that is unprecedented in Jewish history. And Israel is asserting the right of any sovereign nation, in this case, the Jewish sovereign nation, to make sure that the atrocities of October 7th never happen again.
So when you say Israel, I'm going to push you on this, Rabbi Cosgrove. When you say Israel, are the lines blurred now between American Jewry and Israelis? Where does it begin and end? Because when you say Israel, that's us, or is it?
Okay, so that's a question. So
I didn't say I would be easy.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to figure out where to go. First of all, I think that one belief of American Jewry, which I think was already cracking, but actually shattered on October 7th, is as follows: that we believed as a diaspora Jewish community, post-67, post-Entebbe, whatever date you want to have, that life was somehow safer because as a diaspora Jew, you know why? Because there was a state of Israel. Right? We walked a little taller. We felt a little prouder. We were secure in a way that we weren't in prior to 48. And I think what we've woken up to is a reality that because in the eyes of the anti-Semite, Israel represents an opportunity to persecute the diaspora Jew, that Israel, which is busy fighting for its own survival, is not positioned to help the kid walking to the Hillel at Pitt who gets beat up because he's wearing a yarmulke on his way to Shabbos services by the keffiyeh-wearing anti-Semite. And so that sort of construct in our mind that Israel both makes us safer and will make us safe as American Jews, I don't think it holds water. I think in the eyes of the anti-Semite, the American Jews support what you're saying, we're all one Israel, is actually, I know I'm going to be misquoted and regret that I say it, but it becomes a liability when viewed in the eyes of an anti-Semite. And so I think we have woken up to a different moment. And we'll probably get into the generational divide as well. But I think that, you add into the mix the idea that for a young person, this thing called Israel doesn't necessarily represent their liberal universal values. Well, now you're in a real...
we taught them.
That we taught
them because we wanted them to be good people.
Correct. And that to be a good Jew meant to support Israel, and by extension, whoever the Israeli government is or was. So I think that's another conversation we can have.
Well, let's go there for a second. You describe in the book your daughter's friend, Maya, let's call her Maya. And she's articulate, she's smart, she's a Gen Xer who's a proud Jew but anti-Israel, and how she stumped you. Tell us a little bit about how we respond to these Gen Xers who we taught to be compassionate and empathetic to the other, and now we're kind of getting slapped in the face.
Yeah. So I think the Maya chapter speaks to another divide, right? We talk about the divide of left and right. We talk about the divide between the diaspora and Israel, empathy and vigilance. Another one of the fault lines is a generational fault line, because a young person was marginalized both by seeing their Jewish brothers and sisters killed on October 7th, and they were also marginalized because they feel alienated from their parents' generation, our generation, Sherry, that takes it as part of what it means to be a Jew to support Israel. And you can't, a philosopher once said that everyone's destined to live in the time into which they are born. You can't blame someone for when they are born. And for a young person today, the Mayas of the world have been born into a moment of time where the only prime minister they know, except for a brief blip, is Netanyahu, that the only reality they know is Israel with an expansionist settlement policy in the West Bank that precludes a Palestinian state. The only Israel they know is Israel as the Goliath to the Palestinian David. That's their perception, that's their reality, and you can't tell them otherwise, and it's a fool's errand to do so. So when they're trying to square the circle of how their universal values, you were once a stranger in a strange land, to be a Jew means to have empathy for the other, the marginalized, the one who sits on the fringes of society. They don't see an Israel that represents those values. They certainly don't see an Israeli government that does. And so the question is, how do we make the Mayas of the world feel included in a Jewish conversation differently? I think step number one is, I think we have to admit our mistakes, beat our chests, and say, you know what? Somewhere along the way, American Jewry made a mistake. We made support for the Israeli government the religion of American Jewry, the orthodoxy of American Jewry. And
That's such a
so
good point, Rabbi Cosgrove.
and
I want you to say it again because we did make it a religion. We thought
yeah,
supporting Israel was a given, and whatever Israel did was fine.
correct. And I think that and that has proven to be un against our best interests, because, and I'll tell you, one of the interesting things about 2023 happened before October 7th, which were the judicial reform protests. Remember that, prior to October 7th. And American Jews were called on by Israel to support Israel, as were those hundreds of thousands, millions of protesters on the street who, out of love of country, were protesting the decisions of the Israeli government on the question of judicial reform. And American Jews, for the first time, were told, if you really love Israel, then you'll protest the decisions or the legislation of the Israeli government on the issue of judicial reform. And for a young person who now can look on any given Saturday night and see the protests against the Israeli government, say, if half of Israel can be on the streets protesting this or that decision of this or that Israeli government as an expression of love of country, then to tell a young person that they can't do so, that it's somehow a betrayal of the cause, it's not an argument that can hold water anymore.
Right,
And
lo
so,
hegioni, as they say in Hebrew. It does not make sense, or as you say, it doesn't hold water.
correct. And so I think we've opened, so I think prospectively moving forward, I think we have to have a far bigger tent, a far more expansive definition of what it means to be pro-Israel. That one, I don't even know if I like the term pro-Israel, but that one can be invested in a Jewish democratic state of Israel, and that does not mean, blind support of whatever comes out of the Israeli government. I will say as a coda on this, and you and I can, well, we'll take the conversation anywhere you want to go, but I do tell the Mayas of the world that they have, because Israel is surrounded by this ring of fire, because this is a time of war, we have to be very intentional about where we give expression to our dissent. So I wrote a piece in Haaretz about a month or two ago when Netanyahu spoke before Congress. And I said, whereas I proudly stood at the pro-democracy protests in a sea of Israeli flags when Hatikva was sung at the beginning and at the end, proudly expressing my opposition to the judicial reform, I didn't feel that when Netanyahu came to DC a month or two ago in a time of war, that American Jews should express dissent publicly with the Netanyahu government, because you would be standing there protesting the Prime Minister of Israel next to someone who wants the destruction of the state of Israel. And I said, that doesn't help. And so I wrote this, right? So, but that's just one of many examples to say, be thoughtful, intentional, and sometimes even circumspect, right? As Ecclesiastes says, there's a time to, for war, a time for peace. There's a time to express, and there's a time to hold your tongue. And I think if you're going to go into an encampment as a young Jew, and as an expression of dissent from Israel, then know that you're standing there with someone with a placard that says "From the river to the sea." Right? And how does that make you feel, knowing that that person might be calling for the destruction of Israel, and you're just saying you don't agree with the policy of Israel? And are you helping or hurting the cause by putting your Jewish voice next to that placard calling for the destruction of the state of Israel?
I really like that framing, to be thoughtful and intentional about what you're saying, when you're saying it, and why you're saying it. So you say in the book, there's a time for empathy and compassion, and there's a time for vigilance and self-defense. What time is it now?
I think it's a time for both. And what I try to do is, in the book, is to give expression to the "and" of Jewish identity, right? It's empathy and vigilance. These are built in to Jewish identity. When you open up the Haggadah, you open it up on one sense and you say, Halach ma'anya, all those who need, right? Let everyone come join our Seder. We were once strangers in a strange land. We know the heart of the strangers. That empathy strand is in our DNA. You know what else is in our DNA? When we stand up and we say, when we open the door for Elijah, pour out your wrath upon the nations. Or earlier in the Seder, I tell the story about my mother singing that in every generation a Pharaoh arises to destroy our people. We need to be vigilant. And somehow in the toxic moment in which we live, people are saying you got to choose one or the other. You either have to be all in on empathy for the Palestinians, or you have to be all in on defense of Israel. And I actually think that that's not an authentic Jewish response. A Jewish response built into our DNA is both vigilance of our people as well as empathy for the other, both in principle and as a practical matter. Because if I believe, which I do, in Israel and the long-term interest of Israel as a secure Jewish democratic nation, then I also need to be invested into a day after plan for the Palestinian people, that everyone needs a place to hang their hat, and no one knows this better than the Jewish people. And so it can't be one or the other, Sherry. It has to be both. And the sane center needs to reject a world that's telling us we have to choose one or the other.
Well, and I really love that about the book, because you set up the binaries and then you sort of crush them in every way, because you're saying we have to push back on it. You also say we need moral courage at this moment, meaning we're traumatized, we're deep within, hostages are still being held, but we're not paralyzed. So what does moral courage look like?
Look, part of moral courage is for me, and I think what I've tried to, by giving people the Esther moment, is it's going to be different for me than it is for you, than it's going to be someone in high school, than it's going to be for a senior citizen who's looking to find out where they can be effective. Everyone in this moment needs to find the place that they can say, and Esther didn't actually say this, but can say, Hineni, here I am. This is how I'm responding to the moment in time. So I say to myself, all right, Cosgrove, what are the arrows in your quiver? What are the things that you can do? And so one thing, as you alluded to at the beginning of your remarks, is I raised a lot of money. I said to myself, this is a moment where, as a rabbi of Park Avenue Synagogue, it's a well-to-do synagogue on the Upper East Side of New York, and I used my rabbinic capital not to raise money for the synagogue, but to raise money for trauma relief in Israel. Number two is acts of advocacy and civic leadership to make Israel's case in the public sphere, to explain the and try to break the pernicious and porous line between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, to be a full-throated defender of the state of Israel in the public sphere. What I did with the book, right, is I tried to do, and I appreciate the way you said it, I tried to crush the binaries. Say, you know what? Stop. The Jewish people don't lack for external enemies. We don't need to create internal enemies within our own people. Do not, call someone a self-hating Jew because their policies, don't align with yours. Do not call someone a colonialist oppressor because their views are to the right of yours. We are all trying desperately to figure out this moment, and it will be to our enemies' great joy if the Jewish people tear each other apart from within. So what I tried to do in the book is to give people a vocabulary, a language by which we can sit in dialogue between left and right, between the Maya generation and Maya's parents' generation, between Israel and diaspora, that we can somehow show the courage to countenance views that might not align with ours, but we're capable of thinking broadly and inclusively for the good of our people.
Amen to that. I'm going to take some questions, Rabbi Cosgrove, if I can, because there's a lot coming in and they're in no particular order, but I think they're very timely on what you're speaking about. The first one, which speaks to exactly what you're saying, is like, we don't need to be internally critiquing each other. I'm going to rephrase it, which is, I've always voted, this is the questioner, as a Democrat. And now I'm seeing the Democratic Party make some support things that I don't support. Many people are struggling with where they vote, how they vote. And I'm not going to continue with the question because it's in judgment, but how do you reconcile where you're at as an American Jew in this moment, especially when this presidential election is upon us?
Yeah. So, look, I think whatever the toxic, polarizing debates are, just get increased and aggravated as an election comes through. And I actually believe that there is a fair argument to be made. As I won't take the bait. I'm not someone who on principle or on policy endorses this candidate or that candidate. I have friends in both camps and friends who make reasoned, honest arguments for both sides to be in the best interests of Israel and the Jewish people. And I can actually I can make both arguments and I can pick apart both arguments. And I think that's why we have a democracy and the right to vote, that everyone can vote their conscience. I do think reducing the Jewish people down to one vote, right? We need to be very careful of that accusation that Jews only care about a single issue, as opposed to also caring about reproductive rights, the environment, the war in Ukraine, immigration, or any number of issues that Americans and American Jews care about. So I think that this is a moment of time, as it's been explained to me, that there's the level of noise, discourse, campaign talk, and then there's actually, all right, what substantively is at stake in this election at a time which I think is legitimately a time of war, and where the stakes might be higher for the condition of the Jewish people and of Israel.
Yeah, another question came in, which is that the Mayas of the world are not just the Gen Xers, but there's also baby boomers, and that there's a huge range of opinions on what's good for the Jewish people. And how do you stay in conversation with the people that you disagree with?
Look, I use in the book the model of Hillel and Shammai, the two great rabbis of old who would debate every issue, how you say the Shema, how you light a menorah, issues of ritual, issues of theology, issues of Jewish practice. And Hillel won the vast majority of the arguments, right, as evidenced by the fact that we have far more campus organizations named Hillel than named
Is that the
Shammai.
evidence?
Yeah. So he clearly won, but he didn't win because he was smarter. He won because the rabbis explained, would always state the view of the opposition before stating his own view. And if you read the book, if you read any article that I've written, right, I just wrote something in the Hill about hostage release, and I point out in that article that whereas I believe that this is a time for diplomacy, that Israel needs to take the win, as it were, of the necessary and just killing of Sinwar to negotiate a hostage release, I do point out that there is an argument on the other side of it as well, that Sinwar himself was released in the Gilad Shalit hostage release. And the question as at what cost, that right, I have to acknowledge the counter argument even as I'm making my own argument. And by doing that, Sherry, in the big picture, it means that someone might disagree with me or with you, but by acknowledging that that counter argument is there, I'm demonstrating that that person is seen, that that person's view informs my own view, and imperfect as whatever conclusion I'm arguing for, it has to have an expansive view that acknowledges that I don't hold the truth. I just hold my opinion, and truth belongs to Hashem alone. So,
Elliot, you really talk about that at the end of the book, that we need to hold love and the word you use, humility, that we don't own truth and that we have to show God's resilience. How do we teach people that?
the 50-cent word I use is epistemological humility. I talk about
That sounds very big.
yeah, I don't know what it means, but it sounds good. It means that we have to be able to assert our own views, even as we recognize that we are not in possession of the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And I think, right, we often think, and here I'll draw on the muscle that you and I got trained on as a rabbi. People think that religion is something we turn to identify, secure, and claim absolute truth. I actually think that the most compelling, authentic, religious feeling we can have is doubt, of recognizing that there's far more in this world that we don't know than we do know. And that if we start all of our discussions, if we understand that a religious person, right? Someone once told me that religion as a word contains LIG, like ligament, religion. And so what are we connecting to? Well, we're connecting to something or someone beyond what we know. And I think that if we recognize that in our interpersonal relationships, in our political conversations, certainly our theological aspirations, then that is the most authentic place to begin a religious life.
It's so beautiful. I love that religious life begins with connection and doubt. So powerful, Rabbi Cosgrove. So what does Israel, and I'll let you define that, look like a year from now? Like, how does this end?
Well, I pray for peace. I pray for peace. I pray for I don't know is how this ends. You and I are living in a moment where we literally check our phones all the time for the latest news coming out of Israel. We don't know what any day, any hour will bring. So I hope for peace. I pray for peace. I pray for the safe return of the hostages immediately. I pray for a cessation of hostilities on all sides. And one of the things that I pray for, though I don't think it's a year away and it might not even be in my lifetime or yours, is that we start planning and thinking about the day after. I don't want this cycle of war to continue. And I think that Israel needs to fight this war as if there's no day after. And I think it has to fight this war with an eye to the day after. What are we doing right now to prosecute diplomacy as much as we're prosecuting the courageous acts of Israel's soldiers? And I think the Israeli left is dead right now. There's zero trust in any sort of negotiating partner right now, and I imagine that the destruction wrought on Palestinian lives, displaced and lost, is equally, if not more, a loss of trust in Israel from the Palestinian side. And so I think American Jews need to be vocal and forthright supporters of Israel. I think we also need to play a prophetic role of planting seeds for a world that we may not realize, but we hope to enjoy in the generations to come.
Before we end, I want you to read from page 125 of the book. There's so many paragraphs and words that are important, but this one I want every single listener to hear. And if you haven't read the book, you must read it. For such a time as this, Being Jewish Today by Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove. But I want everyone to hear from your voice, the bottom of page 125.
Ours is an Esther moment. We too have made bargains with modernity. We too have adapted to our host culture, only to discover that we are not quite as much at home as we thought we were. Who knows if it was not for such a moment as this that we arrived at our station in life? We can't know for sure, but we dare not risk being on the wrong side of history. Some things are better not left to chance. Today and every day, may we be ready to stand proud as Jews, to pass the test as Esther did, and to courageously respond whenever the safety and security of our people hang in the balance.
For such a time as this, Rabbi Cosgrove, you've not only answered the call, but inspired all of us to rise to this moment, as complicated as it is, as frustrating as it is, how heartbreaking it is. But you've given us a roadmap. And I pray that everybody uses your words to help give them the strength to go forward in the moment, to become their own Esther, and to become literally called to this moment. Thank you so much for being here. And I look forward to reading more of what you have to write.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for the warm welcome.
Be well, stay well. We'll see you next time on Open Learning at American Jewish University.